And hello again, and here we are back in my conservatory for the next episode about this year's project, my Kawasaki Z650 with the modern running gear and the GPz 750 engine. And that engine is right in front of me here. I've now got the crank fitted, I've got a new cam chain, new primary chain, and all the cases have been coated, sort of high-tech ceramic coating. So I'm now at the point where I can try and bolt together the two case halves. And so here we have the lower case. We actually build it upside down. First I need to fit the output shaft for the gearbox, because that's over here in this box. It's just been cleaned and checked over to make sure it's okay. And one problem I had with it was that there was some corrosion or sort of marking on this bush here. Now this bush sits behind the sprocket, the front sprocket, and has a seal around it to keep the oil in. So I was a bit concerned about that, but this has now been dressed up a little bit, cleaned up and refitted. And my local expert, my Kawasaki expert, says, yeah, that'll be fine. The seal will work, no problem. So now that can go back in the cases. That's pretty easy to do. At that point, I then need to prepare these cases to be bolted back together again. To do that, I've got some of this stuff, Permatex Ultra Grey. If it's good enough for Alan Milliard, it's good enough for me. So this you need to smear on all the faces, very thinly. I've done it before, and I think when I first did it, I put on too much on a different engine. And you know, it sort of pushes out from the sides because it's clamped down so tight. And the risk is that the bits that fall on the inside can go in the engine and clog up your oil filter and so on. So you do have to use it very sparingly, so that's okay. And to guide me on my travels, as it were, I'm using this, the official factory service manual. Now, you can buy these manuals off eBay used, but my God, they're pretty damn expensive. You know, sort of 70, 80 pounds for an old, battered, oily manual, and you never know where it's going to have some pages missing and so on. So what I've done is I found a place that reprints them, and so this is brand new. It's been reprinted, and it only costs about £35. Now the only slight problem is that they don't do any colour. So I believe at the back on the service manuals, on the official ones anyway, things like the electrical diagrams are in colour, whereas these aren't, they're just black and white. But for 35 quid, you know, you can't argue with that. The other slight problem is, these have to come from New Zealand. You buy them from UK eBay, and they do all kinds of bikes, you know, sort of Ducatis, old Guzzis, you name it, Kawasaki's, Hondas and so on. They do a huge range of these old factory manuals. I've had a few now and I found them really, really helpful. But sadly, it looks about £35 to buy one. It costs about £35 to get them imported all the way from New Zealand. It takes about 2 or 3 weeks. You know, it doesn't take long. But I still think it's well worth having, because these are brand new. You know, there's nothing missing from it, and they're not covered in oily finger marks, at least not yet anyway. So yeah, I do recommend, if you need one, try these guys over there in New Zealand. Now, I also have a Climar manual, and I also got a Haynes manual. And they're okay for servicing, but for things like completely rebuilding an engine, I wouldn't trust them. You know, you've got to really use the official factory manual that tells you everything you need to know. So for example, in here, you've got all the torque settings for all the bolts, all the crankcase bolts, and it even tells you whether to use thread lock or not, whether to oil them or not, and so on, which is, you know, essential. And sometimes that information is not in the Climar or the Haynes manuals. Right, so what's next then? Well, next I've got to pop in the garage and see how the bolts are getting on that I need to use on this engine that are currently in my ultrasonic cleaner being degreased. Right, so I think this is almost done. Let's turn it off and let's see how it's getting on. There we go. I'm not trying to get these clean, I'm just trying to get them oil free, ready to go back on the bike, and I think this is working quite well. Now, I do see people reusing old bolts just like I'm doing, and there's nothing wrong with that, but what I've seen them doing is trying to clean them up using a wire brush on a drill or something like that. And sure enough, if you clean them up, and I'm using a wire brush on your drill or whatever. They do clean up quite nicely for about a week, and they start to rust really badly, because by using a wire brush on these bolts, you're removing the protective coating that was put there by the factory. So while some of these might be seen better days, most of them still have a decent protective coating on them, like this black coating here. So do not use a wire brush on your old standard mild steel fasteners on your bike if you're going to reuse them, because if you do, they won't last long. They're going to rust up in no time at all. If you're that desperate, then just buy some new fasteners from the factory, or maybe go for titanium or stainless steel if it's appropriate. But yeah, do not use a wire brush. And I've seen some very popular YouTubers doing this thing, and it's just stupid. And yeah, not a good idea. Might look good on the video for about a day, but come back in a few weeks' time if you ride it in the rain when they're damp conditions, and these fasteners will rust up like no one's business. So I'm just going to degrease these like this, clean them up, and get them back on the bike, or rather back on the engine. Well, it didn't take long before we hit a big problem. You see, this transmission is not from a Kawasaki Z650, or indeed a 750. It's actually from a later ZR7S. And I bought this because the original gearbox, the output shaft splines were damaged. So I was told, try this because A, it's more modern, and B, the output shaft, where the sprocket lives, is further out, which is great news for me, because it means it makes life easier to align the chain when I've got a wider rear wheel. That's all good news. But I've now struggled to fit the damn thing, and it won't fit properly. And I wondered why, and I think I just worked out why. So let me take this off and I'll show you what the problem is. And the problem is that the bearings on each end here, these slide off, they should fit into this recess, and this little hole allows for that peg. Should sit in there really nicely, and guess what, it doesn't, it's too big. It won't sit, and nor will the other one sitting there. Now, I was told this fits without a problem by the so-called experts on the internet, and guess what, it doesn't. And now I've dug out the old original output shaft to compare it with the new one from a ZR7S. And as you can see here, this bearing is different. You see here, different size. And even the bearing itself is different. Now, I'm not sure at the moment if the shaft itself is different, because if it's the same, maybe I can just take it all apart and swap things over. So I could fit these parts anyway, onto here, but still keep the shaft itself, which is the thing that's damaged. So if I turn it round, you see here, this is the splined end of the output shaft where the sprocket goes on, and on my original shaft it's knackered. You see here how worn it is, and that's why I needed to get a new shaft. But anyway, there you go, there's a difference. So you learn something new every day, and now I'm going to go off and find out how on earth I can get around this problem. And so it's clear I won't be bolting together these crankcases today, but there are still a few things I can do today to get things moving. And one of those things is to work on this, and this is a starter clutch. And these starter clutches have a reputation for wearing out, and certainly the one in my standardish 650 in the garage is indeed wearing out and making some pretty horrible noises. Therefore I bought a rebuild kit for this already, and so let's get this thing apart, fit that rebuild kit, and get it ready to go back in the engine. So this big cog takes the drive from the starter motor and turns over the engine. However, it's important that the engine doesn't work the other way around and turn the starter motor, and therefore this bit here can only turn one way, but if it turns the other way it freewheels. That mechanism can wear inside here, and so I've got a rebuild kit to replace those parts. And so this part actually can slide off this shaft, which is splined. So let's take it apart and see how this works inside. So let's just move that away for a second and let's have a look at this starter clutch. And what we want to do is replace the parts here on the inside. What we've got is 3 steel drums, which are held in little recesses by plungers, which are spring loaded. And so now you can see the 3 rollers I'm trying to remove, and having pushed back against the springs and the little plungers in there, I was hopeful I can then just remove the rollers, but no, it doesn't work like that. First I've got to remove these 3 bolts, which allows me to lift up this cover, and that will allow the rollers to come out. Now to do that, I'm going to have to clamp this in pretty damn tight in my vise. So let's go in the garage and hopefully get these 3 bolts undone. Right, so here goes. That was okay. That wasn't too tight at all. This is going quite well for once. Right, good. So there's those 3 removed. Let's get these out of the way. So now, can this come off here? Yes, it can. So carefully undo this. Right, so we can see here the 3 rollers and the 3 spring-loaded plungers. So I'm going to replace these. Not a great problem. They sit in little recesses, little holes. Here you see. So we'll just remove those now, and I'll get this cleaned up. I think I'll stick it in my ultralight cleaner. Won't do any harm. There we go, look. It's a little bit mucky. So we'll get that clean. I'll remove these here. All that lot can go in the ultralight cleaner for a half an hour or so, and then we'll put it all back together again with new rollers and new springs and plungers. Right, let's see how it's doing in here. Pretty hot. Oops. There's the screws. They are hot. And here's... Oh, still needs a bit more... Yeah, a bit of muck on there still, look. A bit of grease. Right, I'll give it another half hour. Then we'll come back and start to rebuild it. So let's just turn that back on again. I'll come back in half an hour. And so now I've got the body of the starter clutch nice and clean, as you can see. So now we can fit the new parts. So we'll start off with a new spring and pusher. There you go, in a little hole like so. Come on, like that. It's not difficult, it's just a bit fiddly. Right, like that. And now I take one of my new rollers here and we'll put him in there like so. You see how the pusher keeps it in place. Just repeat that now for the other 2, and then last one. Like so. And then we've got the last roller. So there's the rollers in place, new springs and new pushers. So now if I invert this, they might all fall out. So what I'll do is, I'll undo this, and then I'll just place the 2 together like so. Like that. There we go. Just have to... go. And next I want to fit these socket heads, and in fact when I undid them, one of them was only hand tight, which is a bit worrying, so I think I'll use some Loctite to make sure that doesn't happen again. There we go. Right, so I'm not quite sure. Right, so I'm not sure what the torque should be, these 3 socket heads, so I have to go and check the manual. Then we'll torque them down and then get this back on its shaft. So fitting the rebuild kit to this starter clutch wasn't quite as bad as I expected. A bit fiddly, but not too bad at all. Right, so since I can't fit it yet, we'll wrap it up until we can fit it into the cases. Now, talking about the cases, there are still a couple of things I can do today to move things along. So in the cases here, before it went off to be coated, I had to remove all the bearings. So I've got some new bearings to fit into these cases. And to help me along, I've had a little part made which hopefully will make fitting a very delicate bearing a bit easier and a bit safer. And so here we have the lower crankcase, and here we have a rather delicate needle roller bearing, and that has to go in there. And it's going to be a very tight fit. What I don't want to do is hit it with a hammer or drift it in, because you risk damaging this rather delicate bearing. So therefore my mate Jeff made me a little tool, and that tool consists of a bolt, a nut, some washers and a couple of machine parts. The most important one is this one here, because this is made just to be the correct size for that to slide over it like that. So now what I can do is we take my bolt like so, put a wash on it just in case, pass him through there like that, and then pass him through there, and hopefully there's space enough on the inside, which there is, yeah, to fit that space on the other side, along with a washer and a nut. And then all I've got to do, in theory, is very slowly tighten up this nut and bolt, and it should just gently drift in, just push in the bearing, seated nicely around this piece here, so there's no danger of it moving or slipping sideways. But that's the theory anyway, so let's see if it works. So here we go. I've not heated this up, I've not cooled it down, don't think it really needs it, so let's see if this works. Put my spanner on there, let's see what happens. And that appears to be working very well. I'm not sure if the camera can pick it up. You see here it's going in nicely. It feels quite smooth, there's no sort of sudden resistance. It is getting tighter of course as I go in further and further. I've not even put grease on this, perhaps I should have done, but I haven't. So let's keep on going. It's working quite well. And this is only one of about 3 bearings I've got to fit, but the other 2 bearings are just standard roller bearings, so they're quite happy. I can press them in either with a tool like this or just drift them in, being careful. But I can't do it with this one because it's so delicate, you know, these needle roller bearings are very delicate. Hang on. Am I in yet? Let's have a look. I think I might be. Let's just check. I'm not wearing my glasses, which isn't a good idea. Put my glasses on so I can see what's going on in close up. That looks very nice. It's not quite in there yet all the way. Perhaps one more turn and we should be good. I don't think it'll seat itself. Yeah, there we go. That's done now. So just flip it back and ease it off there. And that hopefully is the rather, as I say, rather delicate. Oh, come on, needs a bit more work yet. Delicate needle roller bearing, seated quite happily in the cases without any danger of damaging them, which is my big worry. It's a bit sticky. Fred must be a bit tired. Come on. There we go. There we go. And that's at least one job I've done that I was concerned about today. It went quite well. All thanks to this little tool that my mate Jeff fashioned up for me. Without that you would run the risk of damaging this rather delicate needle roller bearing as it went into the case. But with it, you're sorted. Of course, it's of no use to pretty much anything else. It only works for that particular bearing, but that's okay. One day, if I do another 750 or 650 engine, I'll keep that. You never know when it might come in handy. And so with that bearing fitted to the crankcase, that's about as far as I can go today. So next then, I need to sort out my woes, my problem with this transmission. I suspect I'm going to end up having to take apart both the old transmission and the new transmission and swapping over the shafts and so on, but keeping the old size bearings. But This is going to see a mate of mine who's a bit of an expert on his bikes, and hopefully he'll guide me as to what the best course of action should be. Right now he's on holiday for a week, so I'll have to wait until next week to go and see him. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll sort out the problem with the transmission, get it in the cases, and finally get the cases bolted back together again. At which point we can then flip it over and start to think about fitting the pistons and the top end, you know, the block and so on. But all that will have to wait as usual, and so for now that's it. So thanks for watching and cheers.